Could this year's appropriations be Idaho's most conservative budget since the Great Recession? Potentially, but no thanks to Governor Little, who presented a budget recommendation riddled with funding gimmicks and federal glut. After a grueling week of political maneuvering, drama, and debate, it seems that conservative changes in the budget process will actually come from the legislative branch. So on this week's episode of Fiscal Fridays, we will dive into how all these changes come together to benefit taxpayers in the next fiscal year. The governor's budget as presented is set to further entrench the state in debt and federal dependency. During his State of the State address, the governor had tough words for Washington, D.C. spending that loads debt onto future generations of Americans. But he has no shame as he perpetuates this behavior by doing this very same thing here in the Gem State. His budget would have 2 of every $5 spent coming from Washington, D.C. Much of this funding includes dollars from the American Rescue Plan Act, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and the inaptly named Inflation Reduction Act. All these are programs that indebt future generations and drive crippling inflation. He also plans to indebt Idahoans with nearly $3 billion in new borrowed spending. Perhaps he shouldn't criticize D.C. for their overspending when he is using their tactics to keep his programs whole. Moreover, the governor's 2.2% general fund increase is deceptive. This borrows the same talking points from the Biden administration regarding inflation. Spending is growing slower this year because it was propped up by large increases in prior years. How large, you ask? Try more than $1.9 billion since he took office, a 56% increase in general fund spending. This also doesn't even include all the hidden spending through transfers, as we discussed in previous episodes of Fiscal Fridays. So, what should conservative budgets look like? Well, for starters, a conservative budget would work to eliminate so much frivolous new spending. For example, why did the governor recommend spending money on things like $1.7 million to celebrate America's 250th birthday, which taxpayers cannot even afford groceries? The governor added another $650 million onto the agency's ask. A conservative budget would work to remove federal dependency, not grow it. As much as 40% of this new budget is dependent on federal dollars to sustain programs and initiatives. A conservative budget would look for ways to curb ongoing expenditures like new personnel and programs. Instead, the governor's budget seeks to add more than 660 new full-time equivalent positions to the state's already 20,670 FTP-strong workforce. Finally, a conservative budget would work to seek ways to eliminate debt, not add to it. The governor is spending more than we have and is making up the difference by borrowing from Idahoans' future. With all this in mind, conservative changes to budgeting may come from the legislature instead. This week marked a major turning point in the budget reform fight. The establishment dissidents in JFAC attempted to hijack the budgeting process in favor of protecting agency increases at the end of last week. However, after much debate, it became clear that there is an appetite for more conservative budget reforms in the legislature. The House and Senate have passed the first maintenance of current operations budgets in the last few days. This will allow more focus on line items and increases, hopefully driving the legislature to use more discernment when considering budget growth. In all, the governor's budget leaves a lot to be desired for conservatives. However, there is cause for optimism among conservatives as they witness what is happening in the legislature and JFAC. This fight is far from over as our attention shifts from maintaining government operations to cutting line items and programs from the base. Hopefully, this is the first of many victories for small government and lower costs for taxpayers. Thank you for taking the time to watch this week's episode of Fiscal Fridays. Please be sure to support our work by liking, subscribing to, and sharing our content. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comments below or send us an email at media@idahofreedom.org.